All right, I'm winding a warp in 2 colors that needs to be about 70 inches. So I have my tape measure, which I'm going to use as my guide thread, and I'm going to start at 70. I think I'm going to end about here. So I'm going to go around this corner. I'm going to go under my first peg and over my second. And it comes a little short. It's fine if my warp is a little longer than it needs to be. I'd rather have it be too long than too short. If I needed it to be longer than 70 inches, my 70 inches comes about here. If I needed it to be about 75 inches, then I can move this end. It doesn't have to go around the next one. I could come down here with my warp path. So for my path, I need about 70 inches, which ended up being there. I have the 2 colors that I'll be using for my warp in a cone holder. I'm going to start by making a slip knot. I'm going to take the 2 ends and cross it over where the yarn is coming up from the cones. Then I'm going to put 2 fingers through that loop, pull up the string that's coming from the cones, and pull it up into a loop. Now, my slip knot slides so that I can pull more yarn from the cones, but it's not going to pull on the ends. The ends are going to stay the same length. Now that I'm ready to bring my slip knot to my warping board, I'm going to put it over where I had measured out the end of my warp chain. I'm going to keep my finger in between these 2 yarn ends because I want to make sure that the yarn is not twisting at all. And then I'm going to bring it to my next peg. All right, so now I'm ready to do my cross. I've brought it to the top peg here. I'm going to go under my first peg and over the second one, then all the way around to the end. I'm going to go under the first one and over the second one. So no matter which way you're always going under first and then over second. Here I'm going to stop and I'm going to push my warp back against the back of my warp board and continue on my path. I'm coming over the top and under here. And I'm going under first and over second. Under first and over the second. Under first and over the second. As I'm winding my warp, I want to check and make sure that I have a cross between these 2 pegs every time. In other words, I don't have anything that's going straight over the top or straight underneath. So we're going to look at how to count this now. I have 2 ends, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I have 10 on top and I have 10 on the bottom for a total of 20. When you're winding your warp, it's important to keep the tension on your warp at all times. So if you want to stop, you don't want to just drop this. You want to bring it down to the next peg and wrap the yarn around itself to keep the tension. So now I can let go and this doesn't move at all. Suppose you have a knot in your yarn or you need to join a new yarn. You're going to put your finger on top so that you keep that tension on the warp, and then you'll cut. Now you want to make sure that you're cutting at either this peg here or right at the end of your cross so that you don't end up with knots within your warp. Can unwind that there. So I'm going to keep a finger on top of my warp. I'm going to take my 2 new ends and I'm going to just tie an overhand knot, making sure that I keep this tension on the warp that's on my board. So I've just got an overhand knot that I'm going to snug up, making sure to keep that tension and not to twist my ends. All right, and now I can go ahead and continue winding my warp. I'm going under first and over second, keeping those warp ends from twisting on each other. Under first and over second. And it's just going to keep going like it didn't break at all. So I've counted 20 warp ends on the top, which means I have a total of 40 warp ends. Instead of counting every time I forget how many warp ends I have, I'm going to use a counting thread to help me keep track. I know that these are going to be 40. So I'm going to put my counting thread behind where my warp started. I'm going to pull up a loop. I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab it to pull up another loop. Now as I get more warp ends in there, I can just go around the next group and pull up another loop and keep going until I'm done with my warp. So here is my first 20. All right. Okay. So I'm at the point where I'm ready to take the first section of my warp off. My warp for this project is going to need 2 of these. So I want to make sure that I have them in the same orientation. And to do that, I'm going to put 2 ties in the top of my cross, here and here. And then I'm going to use a different color and do 2 ties on the bottom, here and here. That way it's easier to line up when I get it to the loom. Some people will go through and around the cross instead of tying 4 ties on the cross, and that's okay too. It just does not keep the orientation of that warp. Okay, I'm gonna go over and through my cross, so I'm picking up just the top here and I'm gonna tie a bow. The reason why I'm tying a bow and not a knot is so that it's easy to pull this out without cutting my warp. If I cut my warp, then I have to start from the beginning, and it takes a long time to wind. I'm going to do the same on this side. And again, I'm using the same color over here so that I know when I take it to my loom that this is going to be the top. All right, now I'm taking a darker color for the bottom, and I'm just doing the same thing. It might be easier to go through under by the closer to the pegs where you have kind of a bigger space. There we go. And the reason why we have to be so careful to preserve our cross is because that makes sure that we have everything in order. We have all of our warp ends in the order they were wound when we take it to slay our reed. Now we're gonna make sure that we can keep that tension on our warp. So I'm gonna come over here to the end, kind of close to the end. I'm gonna wrap around once, twice, 3 times. And this is called the choke tie. So I'm gonna pull it nice and tight. And I'm gonna go ahead and tie this up. If you're using a multi-shaft loom, you might want to do an additional choke tie around a yard from the end. So we're going to go here and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go around once, twice, 3 times, pull it nice and tight. And we're gonna tie that bow. All right, so now that I have the tension preserved with this choke tie, I can go ahead and I can cut my yarn from my skein and it won't go anywhere because that choke tie is keeping the tension. Now I wanna go ahead and chain my warp. So I'm gonna try to keep the tension while I'm doing this. I'm putting my finger in here between these ends and sliding it off the warping board. I'm pulling that slip knot out. So you're just going like this. So like you're starting another slip knot. And I'm gonna walk it to the other end. While I'm doing this, I'm watching to make sure that my warp isn't sliding off of this peg here or up here. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that counting thread because we don't need it anymore. Over here. So this just slides right off the cross. Now I don't need to worry about it too much because I have all 4 of those ties. So now that I'm at the top of my cross, I'm gonna slide this off the loom and I'm gonna slide this off the warping board. And I like to just pull this through until I'm ready to take it to the loom. So now this is ready to take over to my loom.